Isn't it great to hear him sing? Huh? You know, when I was growing up, I had two older brothers, and they were mean and nasty to me. They weren't very nice. And now I just had a birthday this week, and you know, I have Dan Schmidt and Bryce Carlson in my life. They're my two younger brothers, and they got a nice older brother. They got a good one. Those guys are really great. I'm so blessed to have them in my life. You know, if you want to know where you're going, you have to have a target. So you're going to know, right now I'm going to do this in 5 minutes, 6, 7, something like that. I'm going to tell you about the mission of Foundations Church. This is where we're going. And it involves everybody. The church is the people. That's what the church is. It's not a building. It's the people. And so our team got together, we prayed, we worked hard at this, and we came together. We have to, whenever we make a decision, 100% of us have to be at 80%. Does that make sense? Okay? If one person's at 75, we don't go. But if 100% of us say, I'm 80% good with that, then we go. That's what we do. We worked hard at this, and I think almost 100% of us are like at about 100% with this vision. We just feel really great about it. And here it is. It's printed in your thing. But Foundations Church, what we're really about, it's to explore, embrace, and extend God's gift of grace. If you are part of Foundations Church, these 3 E's are going to be embedded in your mind. You're going to get sick of these 3 E's because that's where we're going. Here's what it is. We're going to explore the grace of God. The greatest gift in the world is God's grace to His people. That's what Ephesians 2 says. It says this: you have been saved through faith. That's not yourself. It's the gift of God. It is the gift of God, it says. It's the gift. God gives lots of gifts, but the greatest gift that God gives to everybody is His grace. It's His grace. And we're going to talk about exploring that in everything we do. We're going to talk about people who are far from God. We're going to say, hey, you know what you need to do in life? You need to explore the grace of God. We're going to talk to people who've been Christians for 50 years. And we're going to say, you know what? You can never exhaust the study of the grace of God. And we're going to continue to explore it. It's the most magnificent thing. And when you get it, it's powerful. And we're going to talk about God's grace. It changes people powerfully. It's transformational. And it's hard to get because it's anti-human. Humans don't get grace. It's a God thing. That's why we have to keep going back to grace. Keep going back to grace. And we're going to explore grace in everything we do. It's the greatest gift. It's the gift of God. But you know what? It's possible to explore grace and not really get it. So our second part of our mission is to embrace it. Embrace it. And we're going to embrace it in every way we possibly can. First and foremost, we're going to try to embrace it to ourselves. Many of us are hard on ourselves. When I was taking psychology in graduate school, one professor got up there and said this: if people understood the grace of God, counselors would be out of business. Guilt and shame is just wreaking havoc on people. And you know what? It's one thing to explore God's grace, but it's a whole other thing to embrace it. And we're going to challenge everybody to embrace it. Embrace it in your life, in your family, for your marriage, for your kids, for everybody. It's the most powerful thing in the world. When my life fell apart, when I was 42, so this week I turned 57. Oh my gosh, am I getting old, aren't I? So 57, 42, how many years is that? 15. 15 years ago when my life fell apart. I remember I was mad. I was mad at everybody, bitter, angry, pushed everybody out of my life, including God. And a friend came up to me and says, you're going out with me tonight. And he took me to a bar. And I ordered a beer, root beer. I ordered a root beer. And he doesn't drink either, and he ordered a Diet Pepsi. And he goes, what's going on in your life? And I told him what was going on in my life. And I remember in that bar crying. I was glad it was a bar because it was dark and I was just weeping. I poured out for an hour the horror that was happening in my life. And when I was done, he looked up at me and said, isn't the grace of God wonderful? And I wanted to fly across the table and punch him right in the face. I go, have you been listening to what I've been saying? I go, why would you say that? That's insulting. And he looked at me and said this, Carl, If your life is built on a shaky foundation, the most loving thing God can do is blow it up. That made sense to me. I go, tell me more. And in that bar, my good friend told a pastor who should know about grace but didn't get it. That's nothing new, though. The church doesn't get it. For 1,500 years, until Martin Luther came around, the church didn't get grace. It doesn't get grace. And my friend told me, you've been living under the law, all these ought tos. You ever lived like ought to? I ought to go to church. I ought to read the Bible. I ought to help people. If you're living out of ought tos, that's not grace. That's what we call legalism. The Bible says we love because He first loved us. This thing with God is living out of a response, not out of effort. And He reconfigured my whole life in that bar about the grace of God. And I've been on a 15-year journey since then, continuing to understand and embrace God's grace for my life. It's a great journey. It brings joy. It brings passion. It brings life. And when God's people get grace, they become contagious. Now, I've met some of God's people I wanted to run the other way from. You remember some of those people? It's like, stay away, okay? But when you get grace, there's something about your life that's compelling. So we're going to explore God's grace. We're going to embrace God's grace, all for the purpose of, number 3, to extend God's grace. We're going to extend it to the people in our lives, our neighbors, our friends, people in the church, because we're all messy. And the only way to make relationships work is where we extend God's grace. Now, here's something that's interesting about Foundations Church. Outside of God's grace, we believe the second biggest gift God gives to the church is the people. We don't have a real vision of what we're going to do in the next year except this. We're going to do everything we can to equip you and to help you embrace God's grace, because here's what Philippians says, that God is at work in every person here. And here's the reason why. He says God is at work in you so that He can work His grace out of you. Here's the vision of Foundations Church. Here's the vision of Foundations Church that I'm so excited about. We believe there's people in this church who God is doing spectacular things through. And the job of the church is to come alongside of you guys and unleash what God is doing in you. There are some people who are going to do things in this church that we couldn't even fathom in our meetings. Our church is not about having you come here. Our job is to have you come here, equip you, and then do everything we can to come alongside of you so you go out and transform our community, our nation, and our world. We don't know what the future is, but here's what I'm excited about. We get to paint that portrait together. And we're going to find out. We're going to have ways that we're going to have things that you guys can find out what your gifts are, how to use those gifts. We're going to equip you as much as we can for the sole purpose of coming alongside of you and saying, tell us what God is telling you, because we want to equip you to go out there and make a difference for God. This is a church that wants to be run from the inside out. It's not about us. It's about you. Organizations don't extend grace. The church extends grace. And you know what the church is? People. The greatest gift that Foundations Church is going to have, besides the grace of God, are the unbelievable people that He'll bring here. Because my friend who used to live out in California, my last name is Sutter. And you know, back in 1849, my great uncle discovered gold. Captain John Sutter, if you remember your school, he left me nothing, okay? All right? But there was a saying back in California, when all those people were going to the gold rush, there was a saying that there's gold in them thar heels. Well, here's what I believe. There's gold in them thar seats, right there. There's gold in them thar seats. And you know what the job of the church is? Of the staff? Is to find that gold, to polish it, and and let it shine for the glory of God. That's what it's about. It's not about us having big numbers. It's about you and us working together to make a difference for God. There's gold in them thar seats, and it's our job to find out what it is. This is what Isaiah says. This is what the sovereign Lord says. See, I lay a stone in Zion, a tested stone, a precious cornerstone for a sure foundation, and the one who relies on it will never be shaken. You want to lead a life that you'll never be shaken? There's only one way to do that, is put your feet on the foundation, the cornerstone, Jesus Christ. We believe it's going to be a wild ride. We really do. And we hope you'll come along for the ride. It's going to be great. We're excited. I can't believe the turnout tonight. It's just, I am humbled, bowled over. God is going to do some big things in and through us, and we're going to do it all for the glory of God as we keep our feet on the foundation of Jesus Christ. And I hope and pray that you'll join us for the journey. So, we've been, one of the things we want to do is make sure this is a God thing. It's not about anybody, people, it's about God. That's what it's about. So we've been bathing this thing, putting a foundation of prayer in it. So we're going to take a little time to pray right now. So I'm going to ask Ben Beard, he's on our launch team, to come on up here. And Ben's going to walk us through just a little time of prayer together, okay? Let's welcome Ben Beard, okay?